An ambulance is dispatched to a 911 call. Two trained crew members climb into a vehicle that can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. They drive across town, assess the patient, use equipment, document the call, clean the unit, and prepare for the next emergency. Then the patient decides not to go to the hospital. The ambulance company may have done everything correctly. And under traditional Medicare fee-for-service rules, that response may still produce no ambulance transport payment. That one call reveals the central problem with this entire business. Because an ambulance company looks like a transportation company charging extremely high prices for relatively short trips. Economically, it behaves more like a system that must continuously finance unused capacity while hoping enough emergencies turn into payable transports. And that difference changes everything. Consider what you actually need before accepting a single call. First, the ambulance. Recent municipal purchases show new units easily entering the hundreds of thousands of dollars depending on chassis, configuration, and medical equipment. Then come stretchers, cardiac monitors, oxygen systems, communications equipment, medications, supplies, insurance, maintenance, licensing, and billing infrastructure. But none of those is usually the hardest cost. The hardest cost is putting qualified people inside the vehicle. One ambulance staffed by 2 people 24 hours a day requires 336 employee hours every week. Divide that by standard 40-hour workweek, and you get 8.4 full-time equivalent positions. And that is before vacations, before sickness, before training, before turnover, before overtime. If the unit provides advanced life support, at least part of that staffing requirement may need to be filled by paramedics, who are more highly trained and generally more expensive than EMTs. So before the ambulance moves 1 mile, payroll is already running. That is the first thing most people misunderstand. An ordinary delivery company can park a truck when business is slow. A 911 ambulance system often cannot. If your contract requires coverage at 3 in the morning, the crew must exist whether 5 emergencies happen during that hour or none happen at all. The expensive product is therefore not the ride. It is readiness. And the industry has repeatedly discovered what happens when a company underestimates the cost of providing it. San Diego learned this after awarding its emergency ambulance contract to Falck. Falck began operating the system in November 2021 under requirements that included hundreds of advanced life support ambulance unit hours every day. The opportunity looked enormous. A major American city, a steady stream of 911 calls, a long-term emergency services contract. But owning ambulances was not enough. The company needed enough paramedics to keep them staffed. When staffing fell below what the system required, response performance suffered. Penalties accumulated. Recruiting became more expensive. The operator eventually offered large signing incentives to paramedics. San Diego had discovered something important. You can buy another ambulance relatively quickly. You cannot instantly buy another experienced workforce. We will come back to what happened there because the solution reveals what this business is really selling. First, we need to understand how an ambulance actually gets paid. Suppose a patient sees a bill for $1,500 or $2,000 after an emergency trip. It is tempting to multiply that number by the number of calls and assume the business must be extremely profitable. But the bill is not the same thing as revenue. Medicare uses an ambulance fee schedule. For 2026, the National Ground Ambulance Conversion Factor is roughly $285. Different types of service receive different multipliers, and mileage is paid separately. A basic life support emergency trip, therefore, does not automatically produce whatever price appears on the provider's invoice. Medicare calculates payment using its own formula. Medicaid may pay differently. Commercial insurers may have negotiated rates. Municipalities may subsidize service. Patients may owe deductibles or co-insurance. Some unpaid balances may never be fully collected. So one ambulance ride can have several different prices depending on who is paying. That creates another unusual feature of the business. The person in the ambulance looks like the customer. Economically, they often are not the person determining what the service receives. And even when payment occurs, not every mile has equal value. The ambulance may drive 10 miles to reach a patient. It may reposition after the call. It may spend hours moving around the service area waiting for demand. Those activities consume fuel, tires, maintenance, and employee time. Yet Medicare's mileage payment is based on loaded miles, the distance traveled while transporting the patient. The empty ambulance is still costing money, is just not necessarily producing mileage revenue. Now we can see why one number becomes incredibly important. Utilization. A company does not only need calls. It needs enough productive transports to spread its fixed readiness costs across. MedPAC's National Ambulance Cost Analysis shows how dramatic this can become. Among the organizations it studied, providers in the lowest volume group reported average costs approaching $2,900 per transport. The highest volume group averaged closer to $900. The exact organizations were different, so this is not a perfect apples-to-apples comparison. But the economic principle is clear. Suppose two ambulance services each pay crews to remain available for an entire shift. One crew completes 8 billable transports. The other completes 2. Both paid for readiness. One simply had 4 times as many trips over which to spread much of that cost. This is why a busy ambulance can be dramatically more valuable than an identical ambulance sitting at a station. And it explains a part of the industry that initially seems strange. Private ambulance companies often pursue scheduled or predictable transportation in addition to emergency work. That may include medically necessary interfacility transfers, certain recurring treatments, hospital discharges, and other non-emergency transports. Why? Because predictable work changes the economics. A 911 system has no idea whether the next emergency will happen in 2 minutes or 2 hours. A scheduled transport can often be planned. Crews can be positioned more efficiently. Routes can become denser. Vehicles can spend a larger percentage of paid time carrying patients. According to MedPAC's 2022 and 2023 cost data, for-profit ambulance organizations performed a substantially larger share of non-emergency transports than government-owned organizations. That does not mean private operators do not want 911 contracts. Many absolutely do. It means predictable demand can help solve the problem created by unpredictable demand. You are trying to turn paid readiness into productive utilization as often as possible. And when operators get that balance right, scale can be powerful. MedPAC found that higher transport volume was strongly associated with lower cost per transport. Its analysis estimated that a 10% increase in transport volume was associated with total costs increasing by only about 7%. Revenue has the possibility of rising faster than parts of the cost base. That is the attractive version of this business. But there is a dangerous limit. You cannot simply cut in used ambulance hours until every vehicle is constantly busy. Because if every ambulance is occupied when the next emergency arrives, the system fails. That creates the central balancing act. Too much spare capacity hurts margins. Too little spare capacity hurts response times. And once response performance starts deteriorating, the damage can feed on itself. This is exactly where the San Diego story becomes important. Under Fouts' contract, the company was expected to provide a large number of advanced life support ambulance hours every day. But staffing shortages made that difficult. Fewer paramedics meant fewer staffed ambulance hours. Fewer available units increased pressure on the remaining system. Performance requirements were missed. Penalties accumulated. By 2023, reported response time penalties had reached roughly $3 million. Now management had to solve the original staffing problem while also absorbing the financial consequences created by it. Falk introduced a $50,000 signing bonus for new paramedics. A labor agreement also produced significant wage increases over several years. Think about the chain reaction. A staffing shortage reduces available ambulance hours. Reduced availability contributes to slower responses. Slower responses create contractual penalties and political pressure. Existing employees work inside a more strained system. Recruiting and retention become even more important. The operator increases compensation. Now the cost of solving a shortage pushes operating costs higher. One problem does not remain one problem. It spreads through the entire model. Eventually, San Diego allowed another ambulance provider, American Medical Response, to subcontract some of the missing hours. By June 2023, the combined system was finally exceeding the targeted 900 advanced life support ambulance hours per day. But the most revealing change came afterward. San Diego moved toward what it called an alliance model. Instead of asking one private operator to bear the entire combination of staffing responsibility, transport revenue, and collection risk, the city moved toward purchasing defined ambulance unit hours from providers while taking greater responsibility for billing and collections. Read that carefully. The city began separating two things that the traditional system often tries to bundle together: transporting patients and guaranteeing that ambulances exist. That is a much deeper distinction than it appears, because a city does not primarily care whether each ambulance performs the maximum possible number of transports. A city cares whether someone who calls 911 gets an ambulance when they need one. The public wants spare capacity. The operator wants productive capacity. And the business exists in the tension between those two goals. That does not mean ambulance companies cannot make money. They can. MedPAC's recent cost data found a transport-weighted median revenue-to-cost ratio of around 1.11 among for-profit organizations in its dataset, approximately $1.11 in reported ambulance revenue for every $1 of reported ambulance cost. But that figure comes with important limitations. MedPAC itself cautions that these data should not simply be interpreted as Medicare profit margins, and different organizations serve very different markets. More revealing is what happened when providers were separated by volume. Among non-government organizations, the lowest volume group had a median revenue-to-cost ratio below 1. The highest volume group was above 1. That tells us what the business rewards. Not expensive bills. Not shiny ambulances. Not even call volume by itself. It rewards a system capable of turning expensive readiness into enough reimbursable activity without destroying response performance. So what does a genuinely strong ambulance company look like? In the best case, it operates in a dense market, maintains reliable hospital and municipal relationships, manages scheduling carefully, negotiates workable payer contracts, retains enough EMTs and paramedics, keeps vehicle downtime low, and produces enough transports to spread its fixed costs efficiently. The realistic successful operator may still have thinner economics than an outsider would expect after seeing patient bills. The weak operator can own good equipment and stay constantly busy, yet struggle because reimbursement is poor, trips are badly scheduled, or payroll consumes too much of revenue. And the failure scenario is worse. A few employees leave. Overtime rises. Available ambulance hours fall. Response performance slips. Penalties appear. Recruiting becomes more expensive. Maintenance gets deferred. Vehicles become less reliable. Collections arrive slower than payroll. Now, the company does not merely have a revenue problem. It has a readiness problem. And once readiness disappears, the core product disappears with it. That brings us back to the ambulance from the beginning. The crew responded. The vehicle operated correctly. The patient received an assessment. The company spent real money providing all of it. But if the call did not become the right type of payable transport, the economic system may value that response very differently from the way the patient or community values it. That is why owning an ambulance company is not fundamentally about buying emergency vehicles and charging people for rides. The ambulance is simply the most visible asset. The real business is assembling a network of trained labor, contracts, reimbursement, dispatch access, geographic density, and spare capacity, and keeping all of it functioning 24 hours a day before anyone knows where the next emergency will happen. An ambulance company does not become valuable because its vehicles move. It becomes valuable because it can afford to keep them ready when they do not.